Back, I'm joined by award-winning journalist Jamele Hill, widely acclaimed reporter and observer of sports, culture, politics, and civil rights. She's the host of the podcast. Jamele Hill is Unbothered. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
First, your thoughts on this police reform battle ahead of us as Americans really learn more about how this really works and consider what could be sweeping changes in the Congress.
Well, I'm glad that you approached the story the way that you did, and showing what can be the toll and the cost of giving people unchecked authority. But I hope people look at it from this way as well, from a fiscal standpoint. You look at some of the major cities and the amount of money that they have paid out in police civil suits. I mean, I believe in New York it's like over $1 billion over the course of the last 5 or 10 years. That's a lot of money. So you're talking about city governments that are being completely drowned by police misconduct. And the default position can't be because they're the police or giving them this sort of deity status. Is like, I understand that police officers have a tough job, and certainly not all of them are bad. And this is not an attempt to indict them all, but it is to say that you need some checks and balances. And really considering that the police expect the public to have checks and balances, they expect us to live up to a certain standard, they expect us to follow the rules, it seems a little hypocritical that they don't want any. So to me, one of the tell signs is when you see the police and the authorities as they continue to talk about this issue, the fact that they just feel like they should be able to do what they want to do. I think that's just in bad faith, and that's a way to quickly erode public trust. And next up, we're going to have a conversation about police unions, but that's for a whole nother show.
Well, fair. I mean, you mentioned the other aspect of this that was not in the report we just did tonight, because it's the spillover, which is the individual accountability isn't there, so people aren't personally liable. You don't get the court fact-finding, et cetera. You mentioned at the government level, they pay out these fines, right? And I think people can relate to that at your own work. If there's a rule where the company pays a fine because you park in the wrong spot, just at a basic level, that feels different than if you pay that fine. And the question with all these things is, are any of these quote-unquote consequences supposed to deter behavior? So I think you raise a really important point there. Because I have you on tonight, we did want to ask you about the way that sports and culture and civil rights are rising. And one sign of it is that it seems to be upsetting certain people who have certain ideas about what sports should be. Either it should agree, the sports and the people playing it should agree with them, or quote-unquote be quiet. Take a look at Sean Hannity.
Elites in Hollywood, famous professional athletes, other woke social justice warriors now constantly ramming their political beliefs into every single aspect of your life. Last season's NBA ratings were the lowest in history. The politically charged finals, featuring a very woke LeBron James, averaged only 7.5 million viewers. Americans are fed up. They're sick and tired of the ignorant lectures from this country's pious celebrities.
Jamele.
Well, what I would say to that is, not surprisingly that particular network doesn't paint the full picture, and that they're a little absent on facts. So here's the thing. You know what else was down? The PGA Major Golf Championships. Those were all down. The Kentucky Derby, last year's Kentucky Derby was down 40%. The U.S. Open was down 40%. Last time I checked, horses weren't woke. So I don't know. And by the way, we need to ban that word, because all the wrong people are using it, and in all the wrong ways. It's the cutest little buzzword. It's like a mom's on Facebook thing. I get it. You learned a new term that used to be cool, and you've completely ruined it. So stop using the word.
Kind of like on fleek.
Yes, exactly. Nobody says on fleek anymore. I'll permit your usage, though. You used it in the proper way, right? But here's the thing, is that a lot of major sports were down in 2020 because, I don't know, people were dealing with a deadly pandemic. They were trying to just kind of stay afloat in their own lives. Sports usually is the thing that brings us together, the things that causes us to be distracted from real life. And it couldn't serve that purpose because there was just simply too much going on in the country. And not to mention, we also had sports being played at different times in the year. The NBA finals were in October. It's never in October, all right? It's usually in June, and usually during a time of year where it's not competing against other sports. So across the board, you just saw a lot of falling in ratings. And I think it had a lot to do with what was going on in the country and the fact that the sports schedule was very disrupted last year. We'll see what those ratings look like this year, because I promise you he won't be able to make the same point.
Almost sounds like you're saying we'll see what's about to happen next.
I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, already we've seen with some of the sporting events that have been this year that the ratings have been up. And a lot of it has to do with the mood in the country has changed. You have more fans being allowed to sporting events, so things look different. It has nothing to do, with politics. The NFL even then, they saw some ratings plateaus as well. The Super Bowl was down. Usually, I mean, it still got 100 million viewers, but it was still down a little bit because of all the things that I mentioned.
And the other thing I want to ask you about is sort of the way that the insurrection is being publicly denied as a part of a Republican rehab. Take a look.
There was no insurrection, and to call it an insurrection, in my opinion, is a bold-faced lie. Watching the TV footage of those who entered the Capitol and walked through Statuary Hall showed people in an orderly fashion staying between the stanchions and ropes taking videos and pictures. If you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
So, no, you wouldn't. I'll do my anchor job and say, fact check, that's false, coming from a Republican member of Congress. But what I wanted to get your view on with the civil rights history of the United States is the way that the establishment and the powerful, which can be often a white establishment, actually doesn't just want to get away with things. That's sort of using power, but it also wants to try to have a monopoly on truth itself. And there are people who would know better, but as you and I know, there are also people who might only get some of that view and start to, in 5 or 10 years, just like the textbook debates, actually have a false view of what happened that day, which matters with a race-driven uprising. So your view on all of that, what we should think through about that as a society?
Yeah, unfortunately for our country, it's sadly on brand, because we have seen through a number of historical events how in the moment they try to get sanitized, how they get changed, misinterpreted, just to continue to keep the hypocrisy going. I mean, the truth of the matter is, we have a national problem in facing up to our own stuff. And I really didn't want to say stuff. I mean, this goes back throughout the history of slavery, even, when you look at the history of civil rights, and even now with people trying to rewrite what slavery actually was. So I'm not surprised that this has bled over into the insurrection. I don't know too many tours where you see people climbing the outside of the building or threatening to kill lawmakers, or too many tours where an officer loses his life and many officers get injured and they're left with the psychological damage of what was done to them that day. And it's beyond just intellectually dishonest. It's actually hurtful. It's hurtful for not just the people who were there that day and tried to defend the Capitol and the authorities and police officers that were put in harm's way. It's offensive and hurtful as a citizen in this country, because this is something that is clearly fundamentally wrong. We have to be able to call a thing a thing. We have to be able to say what is actually true. There is no healing that can come if you're constantly lying to yourself. And so looking at how a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives are trying to rewrite what happened on January 6th, it's just frankly insulting. It's beneath them. It's undignified, and it's just reckless. And I'm certainly fed up about it. I know a lot of other people are, and I just don't even understand how these people sleep at night. I don't understand how they live with themselves, knowing that they're continually perpetuating lies and untruths to people on a daily basis, all in a desperate grab for power. Maybe to them, it doesn't seem like it's doing any harm, but it's doing a great deal of harm, because the trust in this nation is completely broken. We are at a very low point in our history, and they are helping to contribute to that.
Yeah, and I think you lay that out well, especially the historical context, which is important, because what we're living through, if we're lucky enough to remain a country and a planet, will someday be history. Jamele Hill, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.